We have MacKenzie from CNBC moderating a fireside chat between Eli-Ben Sasson and also Joseph Lubin. Okay, give them a warm round of applause, guys.
Hey guys, I'm Mac, and I am a tech reporter at CNBC. I'm joined by two titans in the space. Now, Joe, I don't know if you remember this, but 7 years ago, I came out to your studio, the ConsenSys studio in Brooklyn, and when I first started reporting on crypto, you were a kind teacher to me, and here we are 7 years later. Also have Eli-Ben Sasson here, co-founder and CEO at Starkware, also a board member at StarkNet Foundation. We've got pioneers of ZK tech, so excited to kind of get into this idea of exploring how L2s complement and integrate with the Ethereum ecosystem today. But a lot of this conversation will kind of skew to what happens post-upgrade next month. But let's kind of start by just setting the scene here. So when you think about how the L2 ecosystem functions today, that's virtually synonymous with rollups, and in particular ZK rollups. But there are so many different flavors and varieties. You've got, of course, like within the ZK world, you guys are working on 2 different solutions there. We also have optimistic rollups. Help me set the scene. Like how, for somebody who is more of a layman, just tell me about what's going on in ZK, what you're working on, Joe, versus Ellie, and let's maybe set the scene and then we'll go from there.
I can start, back up a little and maybe do a little background or high level. Essentially, the Ethereum ecosystem is maturing, and when technological ecosystems or technologies themselves mature, they tend to modularize, and so that's what we're seeing. We've over the years, we've increased security, we've increased scalability a little bit, and we're on the precipice of having our broadband moment where we achieve very significant scalability along with usability and security. And so what that looks like is a ConsenSys or security module, an execution module composed of lots of submodules, and another module called a data availability module, which will have different kinds of guarantees around the data that's available to these execution systems, because in order for them to prove what they've done, they need certain guaranteed access to data. And so we are on the precipice of getting to the point where we can have real-world applications in obviously DeFi, but gaming and social networking, et cetera. And so what we are seeing, and maybe you can take it from here, what we are seeing is a period of divergence with respect to scalability at the execution macro module, where lots of different approaches are being tried, exploring the solution space, optimistic networks, ZK networks, different variations of ZK networks, and modularizations and layerizations within those systems, and we are looking forward to cooperating and competing across all these different systems as we diverge and figure out what's right. Competition will help us do that, but we also need a convergence period where, just like layer 1 of Ethereum, where we have a bunch of different companies, projects that compete and cooperate to provide essentially a uniform interface for transactions at layer 1, and robustness because of the diversity of the different clients that implement the protocol. We're going to move at some point soonish, and discussions are already happening, to have some sort of homogeneity, some sort of coherence amongst the different systems, and we can talk a little later about how we might accomplish that. But I'm looking forward to a little bit more divergence, and then to bring it together so that we can all work really well together.
Yeah, really helpful framework to kind of think about what the system looks like right now. Ellie, maybe we kind of pick up on the conversation of when you think about the different varieties of ZKs, how does Alinea differ from StarkNet, from ZK Sync? Like help set the scene with respect to the differentiation there.
Yeah, so I think the biggest differentiator today in the space of ZK rollups. I usually refer to them as validity rollups, but I can live with ZK rollups as well. Is that there's the EVM compatible, what's often called a ZK EVM, and there are the non-EVM compatible ones, and they're all layer 2, so they're all scaling Ethereum. And I think today in the camp of the EVM compatible ones, you have, I believe Linea is there, right? It's EVM compatible,
Yep.
and there's a ZK Sync, and a few others that are lining up. I think on the non-EVM compatible, there's only StarkNet, I think. I don't know of others that are rollups and are not EVM compatible. So,
So there's Solana virtual machine, like we can get very,
okay,
very.
but is there already a layer 2 based on the Solana virtual machine?
It's happening.
What? Oh,
It's not,
okay. So
doesn't exist, but it's happening.
Okay, interesting. So, yeah, and so there are like basically within the world of the validity rollups, there's either the EVM compatible or the non-EVM compatible. I wanted to say proudly that we're the only one, but maybe we're not the only one who are not EVM compatible.
First and best.
We are the first and best. And then you have the optimistic rollups where basically there's, Arbitrum and Optimism are the most famous ones, and that's a different technology.
Do we care about them as much as we used to? Because obviously they're not as hard to build as ZK. So ZK is like a couple years behind. Vitalik did note that he thought it would be 5 to 7 years out from seeing like real progress. It's moving a lot faster than people anticipated. Are ZK rollups a solution? Are optimistic rollups kind of like, was that the pathway to get to ZK? I help set the scene for somebody who, I'm a mainstream tech reporter, so if I'm explaining this to my audience, like which developers care about optimistic rollups versus ZK?
I'm not the right person to answer because I'm very biased, so I think for me it was always clear that the validity rollups are the short and mid and long-term solution. I'm biased, and I wasn't surprised that we moved a lot faster than what was anticipated by Vitalik and others.
I have a more social ecosystem kind of response to that, but I'm curious about whether you think the optimistic systems will have a hard time or a relatively easy time migrating once they realize that the obvious direction of travel is validity.
So that's a really good question. I think especially there are two of them. There's Arbitrum and Optimism. They're very different. One of them has adopted the technology, fraud proofs, and one is not. So I guess it goes along with one is slightly more technologically adept than the other, and the more you're technologically adept, the more of a chance that you have of adapting new technologies. But it still is going to be very non-trivial to, let's say, move or add proofs, validity proofs to something like Arbitrum. And then regarding Optimism, I'm still waiting to see them turn on the fraud proofs, So we'll get to that, and then we'll consider the chances of adding ZK proofs to that.
Now,
so can I take a different tack to that? It could be argued, and I may have argued this in the past, that the technology almost doesn't matter, that we will all get there in the end. And what's happening is communities are forming around the different technologies, certainly, but around the different ethoses of the different communities, around the different early applications that find themselves resident on these different networks. So Polygon systems might support a big gaming ecosystem, perhaps. We'll all hope to support big gaming ecosystems. Optimism has their own philosophies that they bring to it. And so my sense is that just like in the real world, communities will have a certain character, and they will persist, and that's probably okay because I think there will be quite a few layer 2s, quite a few layer 2 technologies, and probably multiple instantiations of each layer 2 technology. There'll probably be multiple need for multiple StarkNets in the future, and we'll probably see the online or virtual world really blossom at layer 3s and layer 4s and layer 5s, where different kinds of app chains and communities and nation-state regionalized systems or other kinds of regions just develop.
That idea of layer 3s and like the diversity of the L2 ecosystem we're going to definitely get to. The crux of this talk is, where L2s are headed, the future of this ecosystem, and I feel like we should unpack what Denkun is going to mean when that takes effect. I feel like post-merge, everybody was talking about L2s and scaling, and one of the big fixtures of Denkun is something that you brought up, Joe, DA, data availability, like the race that this is going to kind of set off. Explain that for us. I'd love to hear from both of you about just how significant like the DA race becomes as soon as this upgrade takes effect.
Sure. So I'll take a first pass. First, like to announce that Denkun is officially renamed Denver Cancun for this week. There's nobody from Denver in the audience anyways. They don't really appreciate it. So what it is, EIP 4844, and there are a bunch of other EIPs. They're of less significance. There's maybe one other that's kind of significant. But it basically enables this new data construct called a blob, and you can have 3 blobs attached to a block, and they'll have a duration of 18 days. So they're transient data storage, and they enable, as their first intended use case, they enable these layer 2s to have guaranteed access to the best, most guaranteed stuff on the Ethereum network in blob form, so that essentially they can prove to layer 1 that what they said they did was true.
Blob versus block space.
Blobs versus block, exactly. And that is going to provide an enormous amount more scalability, more transactions per second to each of these layer 2s that need them. There are other kinds of, or other grades or characters of data availability. As I said before, we're layerizing and modularizing and submodularizing, and so there are projects like Celestia and EigenDA and others that will offer just different commercial offerings around data availability and different guarantees.
Yeah, I feel like for years we've been talking about like who's going to be the biggest DA service. Yeah.
It feels like years. It's really been months. A little longer than months. But yeah.
And I mean, in terms of Denkun, what are you most excited about? What does it unlock for the work that you're doing at with StarkNet?
Oh, it's going to reduce, well, hopefully it's going to reduce cost very dramatically for users because basically, well, data, all of the L2 data that we currently put on layer 1 Ethereum as call data is now going to be hopefully much cheaper because we're just going to pack it all into blobs. And so we're already ready for that. We're just waiting for Ethereum to turn on the switch. Our system is ready for using that, and then you'll see very dramatic cost reductions. That's what we'll be seeing.
And we think there will be a lot of blob space, a lot of excess blob space. We're not sure. There may be a bunch of crazy projects that eat up that space because it's really cheap, and that's interesting. This blob space will have its own fee market, and it'll be distinct from the block space fee market, and so we can expand the blob space, and it's intended that it'll get bigger. The blobs will get bigger, and there'll be more of them over time. But that's not the case in the current iteration, and should be fascinating to see what supposedly space that costs nothing does to applications like gaming.
Well, that's exactly my
and
question.
social
Like,
networking.
when you take that like cost barrier away, like what apps am I going to see post upgrade that don't exist now? Like, what does it enable from the L2 side? And then I'm also very curious, how does it change the user experience as well? So maybe we start with on the L2s themselves. Like, what are you going to build that you aren't building today because it's cost prohibitive?
Oh, we'll see some weird shit. Like, crypto kitties galore. I don't know what, like, who can predict it? No, but like, yeah, probably a lot of exciting, fun, new stuff that generative art and on-chain gaming. I mean, I know about some of the teams on StarkNet that want to utilize it. So, like, influence and other on-chain games and just putting a lot more information that is going to be used on StarkNet. That's what's going to be unlocked there. But beyond that, I don't know.
Yeah. So I hope it brings forth a new category of applications that we can't conceive of right now. In the near term, I think it's going to enable what we're already doing to be more economically viable. And so you can re-architect, so there are social capital applications like FriendTech or Tomo, social networking applications like Firecaster, DeFi and gaming. If they re-architect how they're storing data, some things don't need to exist for more than 18 days, or they can exist in a sort of cache in this blob space, and then they can move into some other off-chain storage or use Celestia or EigenDA or something like that if it ends up being cheaper. And so we will see just more use cases become economically viable, and the user interfaces, the user experience will start to feel very natively Web 2.
When I think of real world examples of how it's being used, like you mentioned decentralized social media, I think about digital identity, I think about like the potential for digital voting systems, banks using ZK to secure, customer and transaction privacy data. Like, is this all a part of like the categories that might become more expansive or more realistic in the real world post upgrade?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think hopefully we will. So I think we're going to keep bumping into ceilings of scalability, just because it's a big world and engineers always max things out. And so in the social networking space, I think there are going to be incredible opportunities. So in MetaMask right now, there's some snaps that enable you to establish your decentralized identity, and then you can use verifiable claims and credentials or attestations, and you can create a social graph for yourself. Or Farcaster can help you create a social graph, and maybe you can import that social graph, and then you can start treating it as essentially a social capital asset. So I think we're going to see DeFi built out for social capital. Like if I have one or more social graphs, I can lend them out for a specific purpose. I can charge rent for them. I can merge some social graphs and reach a bigger audience for an aligned purpose. And so it's a very big world, and we're not going to be able to make these amazingly powerful tools available to a giant number of people for quite a while. So we're going to start to see essentially the flippening of Web 2 social networking, where the user is in control of their social graph, and the applications come to the social graphs rather than Facebook owning the social graph.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
We've been talking about like fee reduction and what that enables for L2s to develop. On the end user side of things, like I'm curious about what the cost reduction will look like. Like I hear it's up to 10x cost reduction almost immediately, and then 3x cost reduction 3 or 4 times after that. Like, are you quantifying it in that way, or what's the right way to think about how things change post upgrade in terms of quantifying that side of things?
Well, in the end, it's going to be a question of demand versus capacity, because so capacity is increased dramatically immediately when it's turned on. Question is, when will demand pick up? So as long as demand doesn't meet that, so it's going to be extremely cheap, and that's, for instance, really good for StarkNet users. I'm worried and concerned that just very quickly all of the blob space will be gobbled up, and then just fees are going to go up, and we'll need to move to other data availability solutions. I don't know if it's going to happen or how quickly, but like we at StarkNet worry about that thing. Like what happens if all of the blob space is gobbled up by those, crazy new things that are going to come.
Are either of you worried about, how secure some of these different DA services are, or is that not really what keeps you up at night? It's more like blob space going quickly.
I'm very worried about that. But, we live in a world where as long as the music is going on, and a lot of people don't think about security until there's some catastrophic breach.
Yeah.
And but
if we're not constantly worried about the different kinds of related technologies that are going to affect a paradigm shift in how the world reorganizes itself, then
you're not doing your job.
Then we're not doing your job, and we're not going fast enough, too.
Okay, I want to circle back to two things that came up earlier. This idea of having a diverse layer 2 ecosystem. And I guess my question is, if you have 1 million L2s, what do they all do? And yes, there's this idea of, innovating in different ways. If you have a super scalable L2, that might be good for stablecoin use versus a high throughput one that's better for gaming, but not good for finance. So what's the right balance to strike here? Is there a number that's too many? Do we just streamline?
I think the markets are going to tell us what's the right number.
Yeah.
What are 1 million companies going to do, or what are 1 million different financial institutions going to do in a world? I think a little bit about L1 and L2. Okay, I don't know much about the banking system, but there are these global networks like SWIFT or something where all the banks talk, but then there's a lot of the national and local level. There's so many of them. So maybe it's a bit like that. Ethereum could be the analog of SWIFT, the basic protocol that sort of merges many different local systems, and then there'll be as many local systems as the market decides there's a need for. I'm not worried about that. Okay, I would love StarkNet to be the only one or the biggest one, and I hope we are. But it's the markets are going to define, and there could be ones that specialize in specific kind of things, and we'll see.
Yeah, it would be a highly efficient but boring world if one technology won. So I think it's maybe instructive or indicative to think about the fact that blockchains are next generation database systems. They're database systems with this built-in sort of mutual consensus-based trust. And databases have evolved over decades, different forms: flat databases, graph databases, vector databases, SQL, NoSQL, et cetera. And even within the different categories, there are different variations and there are different tunings, and they subserve different use cases, different purposes. Everybody right now uses, not everybody on the planet, but on average, people on the planet use 10 different databases a day, or 20 different databases a day, because an Excel sheet is a database, and Airtables are databases. We use them all the time. And so I think Eli's totally right. The market has to figure this out. Nobody can figure out what the architecture is going to be. But I think we'll have a few layer ones. I think we need national systems that that nobody believes are co-opted, so that nation states can maybe have treaties on those systems, or one country can sell oil, one big oil company can sell oil to another country that they don't trust, or something like that. And we'll probably need a bunch of these things. I would love it if a few of them were Ethereum architecture. There's another project called Gnosis Chain that's trying to be the same architecture, and they've got a lot of traction as Ethereum, as a consensus chain, execution chain. And then the world will figure out how many layer 2s it needs. And I think that's going to start to look like regions, cities, network states, nation states, continents. So not a million of them, probably not 100,000 of them, maybe not 10,000 of them. But then above these layer 2s, that's where you're going to see a proliferation, different businesses and different niches and regions, et cetera. And I will go out on a limb and say that probably everybody's going to have one or more of their own decentralized protocol database systems. Because then you can add people to them and you can add AIs to them, and tokens come natural for those things. And so my personal databases of choice are probably going to be able to link in very easily with all the other decentralized protocol databases in the world.
Okay, so I feel like you just got into a couple of things there. One, this idea of like the integration of AI into the work that you're doing. Two, this idea of like, you know, layers built on top of L2s, your L3s, L4s. What's happening right now? Like, what is there actually demand and a need for? What's actually being used? Are there L3s to write home about that are serving a demand that exists? Is AI intersection actually doing something, or is it just because it's like the buzzy word right now that people are looking for a way to force it into a system that doesn't need it? I throw that to both of you.
So like we see a few things on StarkNet that are starting to emerge. Beginnings of L3s. I mean, one is like Dojo. So the team just was on this previous panel, which is like a gaming-based engine that will probably end up being an L3 or a basis for many L3s. Madara and Kakarot are other things that are also basis for L3s. And an interesting variant of L3, it's sort of like, okay, so you have like the base layer, which is Ethereum, then you have your L2, but teams like Herodotus, who also presented here today, they're talking about like the L3 being the L1 again. So like this sort of circular thing, because you can bring onto the L2, you can bring in information about historical things that happened in the L1. So those are some of the things that we're starting to see already on StarkNet in terms of using recursion, which is building things one on top of the other, using validity proofs.
Yeah, so different ecosystems, different technologies have their own versions. Supernets, subnets, layer 3s. These one really smart example is Immutable in the Polygon ecosystem, where they essentially have a network and then they're allocating game chains to each of those networks. The idea there is that you don't want a bunch of applications on the same chain, and then if there's a huge amount of activity on that one chain in one game and the price of gas spikes, you shouldn't affect the gameplay of these other networks. We should also probably recognize that this simplistic layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 thinking may just be our naive first characterization, because it could be the case that networks like Celestia become this vast ocean that effectively serves as a data availability layer 1, and then lots of roll-ups are built on top of that. So it's going to get jumbled, I think.
That idea you floated a minute ago about this idea of like nation states that are perhaps hostile to one another being able to use this tech to like mediate certain deals, whether it's over like oil export.
So treaties are useless these days. You can just say, okay, canceled.
Yeah. Sadly, yes.
we're out. We're going to develop nuclear weapons again. But if you're forced to put $1 billion worth of Bitcoin or Ether or something like that, and have some sort of crypto United Nations monitoring the thing and slashing your stake if you behave badly, then I think that gets interesting.
That's fascinating. I feel like for younger devs, like ETH Denver, which, like kicks off tomorrow. We're at a different event today. I'm so excited to have, StarkNet bringing us all together. 20,000 people are descending on Denver, like young coders. Like there's a hackathon going on in parallel with a lot of the programming. And I guess the question I want to put out there is what should people be building? Like what are we not talking about on stage today that's the next thing that you're really excited about that is going to be the innovative tech that, it consumes the dialogue in 6 to 12 months from now?
For me, it would be things about taking back ownership of your personal history and information. I mean, so much that is of value and belongs to us, our information, is right now monetized and held by, some big corporations that are very successful, but it's really our information. And integrity webs or blockchains are really the answer to that. They are saying, well, here's a way to get a more fair and public infrastructure in which you can truly own this property that is yours, that is your history and your information. So I would like to see applications that somehow allow you to do your own personalized, credit rating score and things related to your personal transaction history emerge over blockchain, because I think that's going to be really, really powerful. Now, the problem is that we're still somewhat in a speculative period of blockchains. So whipping out another token for something fun and yield bearing and this and that is like so much easier and to get monetized. But what I would like to see are things that go back to the vision of Satoshi, which is that there's a better and more fair way to control information and put it back in the hand of individuals.
Joe, final word for us.
Sure. So I was speaking with somebody quite senior, and she's leaving her company, and we're talking about what she might do next, and she's been looking into a little blockchain, a little AI, and I tell her that whenever I'm talking to young people in our ecosystem, I point to the fact that we're at the end of this 80, 100-year super cycle, basically. Things are falling apart. The old system is broken and dying. And we do represent the next new hope, the foundations of the next super cycle, and everything is going to change and be replaced by this different, more user-centric, more trustworthy approach. And so if you're young or not so young, just figure out what you're interested in, because there's going to be an opportunity everywhere. So you can build applications, you can do marketing for cool social networking or social graph enablization companies. You can work in protocols. There's something called Protocol Guild right now. And people doing open source projects are going to be paid, and paid very well, by the companies that are using them, the protocols that are programmed to pay money into these open source projects. And so it's going to be a mad rush to build the future. And as long as you're passionate and paying attention, you're going to do great.
Thank you so much to the panelists, to the audience for joining us, and for the conference organizers to put us on stage today to chat about all things L2. Thanks guys.
Thank you.